Hello, Quiet Rioters. Naomi here, back with your regular dose of Poll the Other One. Last week, I talked about the YouGov polling on the UK's relationship with Europe, and this week I am sticking with that theme. At the top of Thursday's Times newspaper front page is the headline, Free Movement for the Under 30s in Reset of EU Relations. So I wanted to talk you through it, what I know, what I hope, what voters think about it, but only, and I mean only if you promise not to come at me with, but what about older people? Because I have had far too many of those messages over the last couple of years. Anytime I've talked about a youth mobility visa scheme, I myself will not benefit from it because, believe it or not, and I know it is hard to believe, I am not under 30, but, baby steps. And let's not forget that young people have been the most shafted by Brexit. So, as you all know, while the UK was a member of the EU, we had freedom of movement across the continent because we were in the single market. With Johnson's terrible Brexit deal, remember this is formally known as the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or TCA for short, came an end to all of that. We can now only stay for 90 days in any 180. And as of next year, Brits are going to have to pay for a visa to travel to EU countries. Since we left the EU, what's happened? Well, immigration from non-EU countries to the UK has soared. Movement between the UK and EU has dropped. In many UK businesses, sectors like hospitality, they are struggling to fill vacancies. And young people have had all of the wonderful opportunities afforded to them through the Erasmus scheme completely denied, and the whole thing's been replaced with a very pale comparison in the Turing scheme. As I said on last week's Poll the Other One, Best for Britain has been recommending a reciprocal youth mobility scheme with the EU for a while now. Our suggestion is a scheme for those aged 18 to 35, so bit more than the 30, to apply for a visa of up to 5 years to live, work, or study in another EU country, and for young Europeans to be able to come here to do the same. I think 5 years gives you enough chance to get your feet under the table, to totally master a new language, to make a real contribution at work, become part of a community, etc. I think it gives you very long-lasting levels of cultural exchange. There are two main things to make very, very clear there, and I do want to impress these upon you. First, a youth mobility scheme is not a route to residency. So when the time is up, whether that's 3, 4, 5 years, and you wanted to stay in that country, you would have to apply via some other visa or settlement scheme. So despite the headline on the front page of the Times, a youth mobility scheme is not, and I repeat, not freedom of movement. It is time limited and country specific. The second thing to make very, very clear is that the UK already has successful youth mobility schemes in place with 13 non-EU countries, including New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Iceland, Uruguay, Canada. They work well, and there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't therefore try to do one with the EU as well. And Best for Britain chose to back a youth mobility scheme for several reasons. First, because younger people have lost the most. Brexit put a brake on their opportunities far more than it did for older people, and few, if any of them, voted leave. Many of them were too young to vote. Second, because the last government seemed quite keen on it. Indeed, former Tory DEFRA Minister George Eustace, himself a former UKIP councillor and a serious Brexiter, waxed lyrical about the benefits to the UK agricultural sector of a youth mobility scheme. Third, because the current government has repeatedly ruled out a return to freedom of movement and rejoining the single market, but a youth mobility scheme is neither of those things. And fourth, because the EU wants it. And it's the EU wanting it, which seems to have prompted a tone shift from Labour. Maybe I'm going to come on to that in a minute. It's a bit more complicated than the Times headline would have us believe. Now, of course, there are many other reasons to back it. Our hospitality sector would benefit. It is just inherently wonderful to see young people engaging in cultural exchange. And as an aside, did you know that there are apparently 1 million Erasmus babies? So since Erasmus has been running, so many couples have got together that there have been over 1 million babies born to the parents of kids that participated in Erasmus. So I just think that's a lovely, lovely anecdote. But of course, there are other brilliant, wonderful benefits. So we polled the idea repeatedly, and this is let's poll the other one. So let me talk you through what we know about it. Well, it is a very popular policy, even among 2016 Leave voters. Best for Britain polling of more than 10,000 British voters last year found 68% to 19% want a youth mobility scheme. And this week, our friends at More in Common, and you'll remember Luke Trill, who has been on the show, and he's coming back on very soon, they've polled a similar question and they found 58% to 10% back one. So it isn't just a low risk policy for the Labour government to pursue, it's popular. Why do I think it's popular? Well, it's probably because voters think that healthy young people are unlikely to clog up the NHS, to be in receipt of benefits or push up house prices. And even Leave voting grandparents have some guilt about their grandchildren losing the right to be, I don't know, like a holiday rep in Ibiza, or go interrailing in their gap year, or to take a year to learn a new language in situ. The Tories weren't so keen on a multilateral EU wide scheme. Some Tories wanted to do a bilateral scheme with other rich EU nations like France and Germany, or northern European countries like Sweden, shunning the likes of, say, Romania. Other Tories only wanted a youth mobility scheme to get cheap labour into the UK to help pick summer fruits that were otherwise rotting in the fields of Kent. And this ham-fisted approach to youth mobility was rightly rebuffed by Brussels. The EU acts as a bloc. It frowns on individual member states doing bilateral deals with third-party countries like the UK, and it really didn't like the transactional framing that the Tories were offering, because for them, a youth mobility scheme is all about cultural exchange across the continent and not a way to fill vacancies in sectors with shortages. In April this year, the EU Commission published a statement to seek permission from EU leaders to start negotiating a youth mobility scheme with the UK. And at the time, Sunak shunned it. And Starmer's team said, quote, it had no plans, close quote, to pursue a youth mobility scheme. Fast forward a few months and one whopping general election landslide later, and the front page of the Times is causing some confusion. An unnamed government source is quoted as saying they understand the EU would like a scheme and so are considering it. But other media outlets are now being briefed by official government spokespeople that this isn't true, that Labour aren't going to try and get one. So where are we? Well, let's start with the known knowns. We know that the UK and the EU are going to come together in 2026 to review the TCA, that Brexit deal. We know that the Labour government has been very clear about wanting to reset the relationship with Europe, and crucially, to get much better trade terms. I mean, they could scarcely be worse than the ones Johnson has saddled us to after all, and business will be telling Labour loud and clear they need better trading conditions with the EU. And on the other side of the channel, the EU is being pretty clear about what it wants. Among other things, defence and security pacts, etc., it also would quite like a youth mobility scheme. So perhaps the UK government is keeping its powder dry to maximise its negotiating leverage when the talks begin in earnest in about a year and a half's time. In the meantime, we know, as sure as eggs, that the right-wing media will seize on any opportunity to cry Ramona betrayal at Starmer. So it is incumbent on all of us, every time we see any of that shit getting shared around the internet, write letters to the editors of papers, call in to radio shows, do all of that, and point out that we already have youth mobility schemes with other countries and they work really well. Point out that even hardline Brexiters like George Eustace want it. And point out that youth mobility schemes are simply not freedom of movement. More's the pity. Riot. I hope you enjoyed this mini episode of Poll the Other One. Do let me know what you think by emailing quietriotpod@gmail.com. And if you want a call to action, well, I gave it to you at the end there. Call it out. Anytime you see people talking about a youth mobility scheme as if it is freedom of movement, tell them, sorry boyo, that ain't so. Thank you for listening and see you again very soon. Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Singita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.